Hello BookTube and welcome to part 4 of Science Fiction and Fantasy, continuation of my 2020 library tour. I'm going to try to get reorganized. I filmed this earlier and my tablet kind of started to act weird. Anyway, I had a really good quip at the beginning of that one too. I really need a dustbuster to clean these shells. So anyway, let's start back over. So the first book on this shelf is Witchmark by C.L. Polk. It's about a young noble wizard who moonlights as a nurse or doctor who falls in love with a wounded soldier in a magical alternate World War I. Haven't quite gotten to it yet. Hopefully I'll get to it sometime in the new year. Next is Accession by Ian Banks. This is the first culture novel I've ever read and really enjoyed it. It's about a rogue mind, the sort of artificial intelligences that rule the culture, kind of manipulating an alien species into attacking the culture while trying to also gain possession of an unknown artifact. The accession of the title. Excuse me. And then we have Christine by Stephen King. This is obviously a horror novel. It's about a possessed car that basically drives the people who own it insane or murderous. Quite like the film adaptation from the 80s. Children of the Night by Dan Simmons. This is a modern vampire novel. I tried to, shortly after I bought it, I picked it from the Friends of the Library book sale nook. And I tried it a few years ago and I didn't quite get on with it. And I sort of have a bit of a rocky reading relationship with Dan Simmons. I've read his 2-book series on the Trojan, or sort of take on the Trojan War, Ilium and Olympus, which I liked, but I also didn't particularly care for. I thought some of his choices, some of his interpretations were a bit weird and problematic, which is probably not a really good word to use. But I mean, it has been quite some time since I've read those books, so it might be a kick in the pants to track them down and give them another go. Next, we have 5 books in a series that I think are like 6 or 7 books. I mean, it's a long series. The Shadows of the Act. It's first book is Empire in Black and Gold by Adrian Tchaikovsky. So I read this early last year and it's okay, but it didn't really wow me. But I might give it another go at some point. So this is book 2, Dragonfly Falling. Book 3 is Blood of the Mantis. Book 4 is Salute the Dark. Love that cover. Book 5 is The Scarab Path. And I think there are 2 more books in the series I need to pick up. Next, I have Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. This came out early last year and is Marlon James's first foray into fantasy. It's sort of, it's more of a, I would argue it's more of a sword and sorcery novel than a epic fantasy. It's about a character called tracker who has the ability to find anything and everything lost. He is an adventurer. He eventually is hired to join a party to find a missing prince, or a young boy who's eventually revealed to be a missing prince. And then years later, he sets out on a quest for revenge, as that prince is actually a monster who destroyed his found family. Anyway, I mean, the thing is the novel itself isn't really all that complicated. It's the way Marlon James tells the story. It's sword and sorcery, or maybe sword and soul, but it is also very literary. It's sort of using literary techniques, or the techniques you would normally associate with literary fiction. And I think that might explain some of the complexity and difficulty that some readers find this book to be. And I'm planning on coming back to it, I think, in February. I think I'm going to make a concerted effort to read it in February. Next is The Stars Are Legion by Cameron Hurley. This is a space opera in which the main character continually loses her memory. And she eventually rediscovers it, and along with all of the various plottings of her part of this sort of multi-world generationship. And I didn't particularly care for it all that much. I thought the characters, I think, didn't really appeal to me. And some of the plotting I had issues with, but it's been about, no, I think I read it last year, so. Anyway. I didn't particularly care for it. Next is The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is a book about two worlds and a scientist who struggles with identifying with either one politically. He is born on an anarchist planet, and his sort of research isn't really beneficial to the anarchist society, or the anarcho-Marxist society. And he finds the sort of the hyper-capitalist main planet sort of alienating as well. And I think this is one of Le Guin's most famous works. I read this when I was a student assistant for a class in college. So basically, I mentioned before, when I was at St. Edward's, they would have an introduction to liberal studies, or introduction to the liberal arts, or something like that. And it's basically an introduction to being a college student. And I eventually was hired, like I got a thing where I was hired my junior year for to help with the another class. This one was more of a technology class, and this book was one of the books read. And I remember quite liking it, although much like with Dune, I think my interpretation might not have been what Le Guin might have intended. The Stand by Stephen King. This is his great big standalone epic novel of a post-apocalyptic America, which is currently being new film adaptation is currently on CBS All Access, which I might pick up eventually. And next is The Space Opera Renaissance, edited by David G. Hartwell and Catherine Kramer. This is a fantastic book, just absolutely fantastic anthology. And then Solari by Michael Johnston. This book has plagued me for quite a while. I'm interested in the idea of the book, but I haven't quite gotten into the book itself yet, and I really should make another go at it. Have Mercy by Jada Jones and Danielle Bennett. This originally came from Sherburne Public Library, and I bought it from a Libris. And next we have some more John Sprunk. Blood and Iron, the first book in the Book of the Black Earth series. Storm and Still, Book 2. And Blade and Bone, Book 3 in the series. And finally, we wrap up this shelf with The New Weird. It's an anthology edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer. So The New Weird is a genre that first appeared in the early 2000s, although there were some antecedents before then. But it's sort of this melding of steampunk with the weird and also heavy emphasis on body modification. And initially it seemed, as of the introduction to The New Weird, that The New Weird only lasted for a few years in the early 2000s, but I would argue The New Weird has actually continued on, particularly with Jeff Vandermeer's own work. And this is a really good, interesting anthology. I've read it several times, checking out from my library, but I really wanted a copy of my own, and I picked it up from pals through a Libris. So my favorite story in here is The Izzard of Ooze by Jay Lake is really good, as is The Gutter Sees the Light That Never Shines by Alistair Rennie. I really like that one, and I've really looked to try to see if I could find anything else by Alistair Rennie, but I don't think he's ever really published anything besides 2 stories that I've been able to find. I'm not entirely fond of the kind of like the last part of the book, where it's more of a discussion, essays, and sort of a round-robin story. I didn't particularly care for that part, but I mean, on the whole, this is a really good anthology. So that wraps up Shelf 4. Thank you, BookTube. Have a great afternoon. I will see you tomorrow with parts 5 and 6. And I will see you. And until then, stay safe. Thank you, BookTube.